Good morning, everyone. Thanks for ODI, Alina, for having us and organizing this conversation with you. I'm here not as a researcher myself, but actually as a privileged reader of more than 700 pages of research. And 150 from Nick, but the rest from other two teams that actually contributed to this project. The team led by Herbert Kitchell, well-known researcher on clientelistic politics, which actually includes 7 case studies and uses a big data set, the DLP data set on clientelistic and programmatic linkages, and also a desk review made by Juan Pablo Luna from the University of Chile. So why we did that, why we commissioned these 3 excellent research teams to do this job. Just to say it, simply, we at IDEA wanted to understand why, while we were recognizing that development was a strongly political process, politics was not necessarily as developmental. So we wanted to understand under which conditions, through which ways politics can become more program-based, political parties more programmatic in that sense. So what we did was to commission that research, and so I have much harder task than Nick, because I need to summarize part of his own implications or conclusions, but also Herbert Kitchell's and Juan Pablo Luna's. So what we've done is basically to sum up these implications in around four sets of factors that seem to affect the way and the conditions under which political parties become more programmatic. The first of these conditions are enablers, and Nick just finished his presentation referring to these conditions. Then triggers, lockers, and agents. I'm going to explain more about these 4 sets in the following thing. So, development. Nick finalized his presentation saying that, of course, in some contexts seem unpromising for programmatic party development, and of course that refers to a number of conditions. The level of economic income or income in the countries seems to have strong influence on the likelihood of this emergence. Of course, that affects the level of education of voters. Voters seem to be more conducive to do this, and the level of the bureaucracy, strong bureaucracies seem to affect, and that's referred to in the paper by Dan and Nick. And also the size of the budget for certain specific sectors, etc. So we want to refer to all these conditions under the effect or under the label of development, just to refer to that they might help to set the stage, but not only because of voters' sophistication, but also because of the state capacity to implement policies and deliver credibly nationwide public goods. So it's not only about, it's not an automatic translation from having high levels of income, either the state or the population, but rather the capacity of the state to deliver that type of public goods that programmatic politics is about. So, of course, that might affect the voters' receptiveness to programmatic politics. They might support parties that offer credibly these type of goods. And that might also, that's the main type of implications we draw from this, are that, of course, we cannot do much to, speaking from the international ideas perspective, we cannot do much about the level of development of a country, in terms of how to shape these, the conditions under which programmatic parties might emerge. But we might be interested in looking at specific sectors that might offer better than average capacities to deliver these public goods, and focus on these specific sectors to develop programmatic politics or to foster this type of engagement with citizens. So that's the first. Then from the second set of factors, these triggers, we also learn from this research that, and basically that's one of the main Kitschel's contributions to, to this topic, is that crisis and transitions do open windows of opportunity for this transition to take place. How? Because they basically, under this financial crisis or economic crisis or changes of models of the political economy formats, voters need answers to their problems, and that they have questions, they look for alternatives. And of course, political parties might find an opportunity to offer these answers to voters by engaging in in programmatic politics. Let me just give you one example, which is the South Korean party system. South Korea was a highly economically developed country well, not highly, but increased income levels of income in the early 90s, but it didn't produce automatically this type of party system configuration. It was only until the crisis of '97, in which, and not even that election, the election that year, in which was the last of the Kims who assumed the presidency, but just shortly later on, in 2000, in which parties actually started to appeal to this type of things. They had the capacity to do that, of course, but it wasn't until this crisis that they started doing it effectively. So they abandoned or played lesser emphasis on this child clientelism to start doing politics around this set of programmatic appeals. The first, one of the biggest reforms of that time was actually the expansion of health services, health insurance, the unification of these systems that produce that mobilize a large number of voters to this around this the Kim's party, which so another of we also look at some conditions that might seem to have an effect on locking in programmatic gains. So after programmatic gains are visible, these changing the rules of the game, so specific reforms might have an effect on securing those gains. But this is something that we don't really, we at IDEA and other democracy assistance organizations, we have the tendency to place a lot of emphasis on these type of reforms, but they might have this limited effect, but that only seem to operate in a very specific way and highly contextualized way. Of course, they are good to move from high personalization of politics to more to place more premium or emphasis on party labels rather than only personalities. What are these reforms? For instance, in Ukraine, which is one of the case studies in Nick and Dan's, they seem to have a lot of programmatic gains at the time where the electoral rules were changed to get away from this SMD system, no? This single-member districts to proportional representation and closed lists. That's and of course that's being, so powerful. The effect of this reform was that the government actually just recently changed it to for the last elections to secure this majority in parliament. Other examples are, for instance, Brazil, in which in 2002, after 2 terms of PSDB government, they dropped the rule that was called candidato nato, by which parties, incumbents have the birthright incumbency. So they had the right to run for office just automatically by being in office. So that type of rules were dropped and actually helped to strengthen the pragmatic nature of the system. Just to go quickly, opposition, long-term opposition seems to have an effect, and that's also being mentioned by Nick just in his presentation. How does it happen? Yes, I mean, it's basically by fostering polarization and politicizing new issues and salient issues that are good for attracting votes. These confrontational strategies, I mean, polarizing around certain specific public goods, seems to have an effect. I put the picture here of the House of Commons chamber because, I mean, I remember when I was at school, a professor used to say that Churchill had advocated to keep that rectangular confrontational shape. I thought he was just joking, but indeed, he said something like, we shape our buildings and our buildings shape us afterwards. So that was actually the advice. I mean, that happens. That's the picture on the left is actually the Chilean Congress, the plenary, which, I mean, that's also a two-party, very strong two-party system that is progressively allowing a third party, highly problematic in many ways. But then don't tell that advice to these guys because they might actually find it too powerful. So they can lead pragmatic politics when there is a neck-to-neck competition, basically in highly affluent countries when there is resources to distribute that might trigger this engagement. Civil society mobilization, I won't say that much because Nick has already put it, but clearly we have the cases of these external mobilized political parties that have that. Not only in Zambia, but also Brazil is an external mobilized party. The Workers' Party was born by under the influence of the CUT. And also that's the case of a third party in South Korea which has just won around 7 or 8% of the votes in the last election. That might also be the case of the Bolivian MAS, which is basically a confederation of civil society organizations. Why? Nick has already said it. They get policies, a constituency, and organizational infrastructure. And finally, the final implication of this research is that you can have it all, but if you don't have like electable, politically savvy, and competent, successful leaders, you might hardly, achieve this type of programmatic development. That was the case of Fernando Henrique Cardoso as well. He was a successful finance minister with the Plan Real in Brazil, and then he went on becoming president. And that was also the case of course, of a highly charismatic Lula, who, with this long-term vision from the opposition, demonstrated to be competent and electable and politically savvy in the case of Brazil. So I'll leave it here. I mean, I actually presented a very overly simplistic view of the findings, but these are just the messages as we take them, I mean, the way that they make sense to us at International Idea.